Shannon Singleton is running for Multnomah County Commission in District 2, representing North and Northeast Portland. The position now held by Jesse Beeson on an interim basis. A clinically trained social worker, Singleton was a housing policy advisor and the director of equity and racial justice in Governor Kate Brown's administration. Recently, she was interim director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services before current Joint Office Director Dan Field. Shannon Singleton, welcome to Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken.
Well, the County Commission is again proposing handing out tents and tarps this winter. That's a practice that led to lawsuits, conflicts with the city of Portland, which wants to clear them out.
Still allow for tents, tarps to be distributed other than when emergencies are declared. So we're still evaluating. It does show progress.
So what do you think about handing out tents and tarps again this winter?
I think it's really been a long time tool that outreach workers have used to have that step one of developing relationship with people. It is not something that's new in handing out tarps and tents. It's something that's been going on, and blankets is something that's been going on for years. Excuse me. I really think, one, it's a lot more about the wet than it is about the cold. We know that not all of these tents or tarps are keeping people from extreme weather events, and there's work to get people into those severe weather shelters. However, it really is a thing that can help people stay dry and stay healthier while they're still stuck sleeping outside.
One of the issues that has been brought up about that is where these tents and tarps are situated. You know, there was an ADA lawsuit about right-of-ways on sidewalks. How is that being figured into the plan for what you know about it?
I think really I don't think there's a specific plan about how or where tents and tarps are put out. There's a lot of education for people who are still experiencing homelessness that, again, outreach workers do to help them be a part of the community and not a nuisance in the community. And so while sometimes people may still be, their only option is to be on a sidewalk, generally in the past we've had people break those down and move to a day center in the morning. I think we're missing some of the other pieces of the homeless service system that actually supports people, even if, again, there's not enough shelter spaces for them. They actually have some place to go so that their gear is being broken down or stored and moved during the day while folks are trying to traverse downtown.
You were interim director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services. What did you learn about the Joint Office during that time, and what would you change about how the office operates today?
Well, when I got there at the Joint Office, and I got to spend 8 months with the staff there, and I learned so much about how much work they had done. They had actually stood up a number of shelters and were running those during the COVID pandemic to really find more places for people to get inside. And so there was a mix of direct service as well as the policy work happening. What I learned, though, was that there wasn't a plan or a calendar around how money would go out the door. And so providers often felt like suddenly they would be told, oh, there's going to be money for housing placement dollars, and they had to scramble to figure out how they could integrate that into their program. And so I developed a NOFA calendar, Notice of Funding Availability calendar, so that providers could prepare, develop the collaboration and partnerships they needed to be successful in putting that money out the door and serving the community. That was a big shift that we made, and I'm not sure if that's continuing, but I hope that it is. Providers really need it, and they liked it. The other thing that wasn't happening was they stopped doing the system meetings with providers. So we used to meet as shelter providers and talk about what's going on in our shelters, what are things that we're hearing from people, what are maybe some new best practices, what are groups that we've heard of. For example, we had people start coming into the Safe Shelter to operate self-help groups, and other shelters didn't have that. So we could have that shared learning and resource sharing, and that went away, and it needs to come back.
Where's the accountability with the Joint Office, though, in terms of outcomes?
So the outcomes are primarily by provider, and I think there needs to be that larger system conversation. This has, again, been something that the folks on the front line have told me is there's lacking the ability to see the data across the system. And so, again, as a shelter provider, I only know my data. So if my data is good, I'm good, and the Joint Office accepts my report. but we're not looking at it across the whole system and having a conversation about how are we doing as a whole. So that really needs to shift.
Is that something that would be a priority of yours if you're elected to the Multnomah County Commission?
I absolutely. We need, first, the community needs to be able to understand the data. We say things like we count bed nights, and that's not something that is really user-friendly to access, nor is it really meaningful data. So I think it's important that we talk about what are the actual outcomes when it comes to housing placement, when it comes to housing retention. That is something the Joint Office was not doing a good job of tracking or reporting, and that really needs to change, because if we've got people getting housed but falling right back into homelessness, then that's not a functional system. So we have to be able to talk about that, not just as elected officials or as the bureaucrats or the providers, but the community needs to understand that data.
Multnomah County has filed a $52 billion lawsuit against fossil fuel companies, including Northwest Natural Gas, claiming that greenhouse emissions caused the deadly heat dome of 2021. Do you agree with that lawsuit and the principles behind it?
I think there's so many factors that go into what has caused climate change and the heat domes that we have, and I think there's responsibility to go around. We know what the neighborhoods look like that have experienced those heat domes. They're poorer, they're blacker and browner, and they have less tree canopy. So there's a lot of things that we could do to address that issue, and I haven't spent time digging into the lawsuit, but I think we really need to look at the full picture and move into the space of what are we going to do to change this, because it's not going to suddenly disappear that we don't have heat domes here. We've got to fix that problem now.
Multnomah County's Deflection Center for Drug Offenders scheduled to open Monday in Southeast Portland. We mentioned that earlier. Are you happy with the direction, at least before the opening, of what the Deflection Center is supposed to do? And are you optimistic that it'll work?
I keep asking, what are we deflecting people to, Ken? Yes, we need a deflection center, but we also lack treatment beds. And so if we don't pay attention to, again, that broader system, where does somebody go if they need inpatient treatment? And that question is still not able to be answered. So I think, yes, let's open a deflection center. I know some of the mobile deflection has been functional. I've talked to some frontline workers doing that. But we can't just do deflection. We have got to also look at the bigger need of treatment beds in this community.
We've only got about 30 seconds left, but I want to ask you about the structure of the Multnomah County Commission, which puts a lot of power in the hands of the chair. Would you like to see that balance changed?
You know, I think really we just saw voters decide to change that weakened, diffuse form of government at the City of Portland and really make it something that was more functional and looks a lot more like it does at the county. I don't think that really, to me, it's up to the voters. I don't think that it's something that we should be doing as elected officials. I do know that there's issues around people being able to get things on an agenda, and that is an executive decision that I do think should change, and I would vote to change that. However, the structure of the government, I think, is up to the voters, and I would support the conversation if people want to have it.
Shannon Singleton, thank you very much for being here on Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you so much.